don't have a problem with love, you have a problem with being loved. And that is not the same thing. You know how to give, you know how to stay, you know how to be there when things get hard. But the moment someone starts really seeing you, you find a reason to pull away. Not dramatically, quietly. You become a little less available, a little harder to reach, and you tell yourself that you're simply independent or cautious, or that you just haven't met the right person yet. But that's not it. The real problem is not that no one gets close enough. The real problem is that when someone does get close, that is exactly when you disappear. There is one thing you do better than most people around you. You can feel when someone is struggling before they say a word. You see the exhaustion behind the smile. You hear what is left unsaid. And you do not wait to be asked. You are simply there, calm, reliable, in a way people remember for years. That is not an accident. It is a skill built through experience that was not easy. But there is one thing that same person does not know how to receive. Attention, care. The presence of someone who did not come for help, but came for you. And that is where the problem begins. When someone approaches you for no reason other than wanting to be close, something in you starts looking for the exit. Suddenly you're busy, or funny, or present in a way that seems warm, but keeps real contact at a distance. Close enough not to seem cold, far enough to stay safe, and you do it so skillfully that most people never notice, not even you. Imagine a person who knows everything about wounds, who has sat with people through their darkest nights, who understands pain with a precision that unsettles others. That person sits across from someone who is looking at them with something that is neither gratitude nor admiration, just closeness. And they do not know what to do with it. Not because they do not want it, but because once long ago they learned something no one ever said out loud, that being seen comes at a cost. That closeness is not safe, that it is easier to be the one who holds than the one being held. That is not your character, it is a mechanism and it has a name. Life did not break you in one specific place. You did not lose trust because of one person. You did not shut the door after one night that went wrong. For some people, this pattern does not look like the consequence of a single event, but like something more deeply built into the way they experience closeness. There are people who are born with a certain sensitivity embedded deep in their structure, not as weakness, but as the way they perceive the world. Every closeness, every gesture of attention, every attempt at real contact passes through that same place. And that place does not ask whether the person in front of you is safe. It does not ask whether the timing is right. It simply registers. Someone has come too close. And the body is already looking for the way out. Someone sends you something tender, and you reply, but a little more neutrally than you really feel. Not because you feel nothing, but because showing how much you feel suddenly seems like too much. And that is where something lies that most psychology misses, because psychology is always looking for a cause. Always looking for a moment, always assuming that somewhere, sometime, something must have gone wrong for a person to become this way. But what if it didn't? What if this is simply a natal configuration? The way some people come into the world with perfect pitch, or with a deep need for solitude, or with an instinct for other people's pain that others do not have. There are people who, from the very beginning, feel more than they can show, who are tuned to a frequency their environment cannot always follow, who know other people's pain with a precision that confuses even them. And those very people most often do not know what to do when someone turns that same attention toward them, not because they are incapable of it, but because the sensitivity that allows them to see others is the same sensitivity that leaves them vulnerable when someone starts really seeing them. It does not feel like a wound that came later, more like a sensitive place that has been there from the beginning. Beneath the surface, functional, quiet, and every relationship that goes deep enough runs into it. A relationship begins well. In fact, it begins better than you expected. The person in front of you sees you, asks the right questions, stays when most people would leave, and you feel it. Somewhere beneath your ribs, something you recognize as, this is real. And that is exactly when the problem begins. You start looking for cracks, not consciously, not intentionally. It is simply that all of a sudden you notice things you did not see before. The way something was said, the moment they were not there, a small detail that means nothing on its own, but inside you begins to carry a weight it does not actually have. And you begin to pull away. Millimeter by millimeter, you become a little busy, a little less available. You reply, but with less warmth. You show up, but you are not really there. And if someone asks, everything is fine. You're just tired. You just need a little space. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable than that. It became too real. There is another pattern that appears within this inner pattern. And it is even harder to recognize. Sabotage at the very moment things are most beautiful. Not when things are hard. Not when you are fighting. Not when something is not working. But exactly when everything is working. When you are happy in a way you do not know how to carry. When the relationship begins to take on the shape of a future. And then, something snaps. Maybe you start an argument out of nowhere. Maybe an old habit returns, an old version of you that knew how to live without this, because if everything falls apart now while it is still beautiful, at least you are the one who decided. At least you did not wait for someone else to leave you. At least the wound is yours. Imagine someone who spends years building something with a person who loves them. A stable relationship, a present partner. No major crises, no dramatic breakups. Just quiet, steady closeness. And that person, instead of finding peace in it, grows increasingly uncomfortable. They begin to doubt. They begin to search. Not because something is missing, but because they never learned what to do when nothing is missing. Closeness without crisis, for some people, sounds like stability. For a person with this inner pattern, it can sound like something they do not even have a name for, but from which they run anyway. In Greek mythology, there is a figure who fits into no clear category. He is not a god, not a man, not a hero in the classical sense. Chiron is a centaur, half horse, half man. But unlike the other centaurs who were wild and unpredictable, he was wise, educated, serene. He taught the greatest Greek heroes, Achilles, Jason, Asclepius. He knew how to heal wounds others did not even recognize. But he had one wound he could not heal, his own. He was struck accidentally by a poisoned arrow. And because he was immortal, he could not die from it. He could only live with it forever, until in the end he chose to give up his immortality, just so the pain would stop. This is not just a myth. It is a description of a mechanism some people carry from birth. In astrology, that archetype marks a place of deep structural sensitivity. Not a wound acquired through life, but a place where a person comes into the world already open, already sensitive in a way others do not always understand. And the paradox is always the same. That very place becomes the source of the greatest strength, but only when it is turned toward others. A person with this configuration develops the ability to understand another person's pain with a precision that unsettles people. They see what is hidden. They feel what is unspoken. They know how to be with someone in the moment it matters most, without asking for anything in return. But when someone tries to do the same for them, the mechanism closes, not out of selfishness, not out of coldness, but because that place is still open, still sensitive, and every real contact in that place hurts in a way that is hard to explain to someone who has never felt it. Asclepius, one of Chiron's students, became the god of medicine. But he did not learn healing from books nor from his own pain. He learned from someone who lived with a wound he could not close, and precisely because of that knew what a wound requires. That is the core of the paradox. The greatest teacher of healing was not the one who recovered. He was the one who could not. And maybe you recognize that structure in yourself. Not as fate, not as punishment, but as a fact you live with, often without naming it, often without seeing it, because it is so much a part of you that you no longer distinguish it from your character. You think this is simply who you are, that you are independent, that you do not need much, that you are happy this way. But sometimes late at night, in a silence that does not feel comforting, you ask yourself why it is so hard to let someone truly in. You do not know the answer, or you do, but you pretend not to. No one notices when it begins. There is no day when you decided, no moment you can point to and say, that is where it started going wrong. Just year after year, you live at a certain distance from anything that might become truly close. And that comes at a cost. The first cost is this: you become an expert in surface. You know how to look present. You know how to speak in a way that sounds open but reveals nothing real. You know how to be funny, warm, even intimate, up to a very precise depth. And at that point, you stop. So skillfully that others often do not notice where you stopped. But you know. You always know. The second cost is a loneliness that has no good explanation, not the loneliness of a person who has no one, but the loneliness of a person who has people around them and still feels alone, who sits at dinner with friends and feels a glass wall between themselves and everything that is happening, who is in a relationship and still is not sure whether they are really there. That loneliness is heavier than the first one, because the first one can be explained by circumstance. This one cannot. Albert Camus, the French writer and philosopher, described in his novel The Stranger, a man who moves through his own life like an observer, present but absent, functional but untouchable. Camus was not writing about a cold man. He was writing about a man who had lost contact with his own inner life and no longer knew how to get it back. Many people who carry this pattern recognize that image, not because they are cold, but because they have learned to function without contact with what is most sensitive in them. And after enough time, that distance becomes the default. It becomes normal. It becomes a character. Franz Kafka, the Czech writer from the early 20th century, spent years writing letters to a woman who loved him. Felice Bauer waded through engagements, breakups, renewed engagements, an entire cycle repeating itself, not because the feeling was not real, but because every time intimacy became concrete, Kafka found a reason to step back. He wrote himself that marriage was impossible for him, not because of her, because of him. That was not cruelty. It was the only honest description of a mechanism he did not know how to stop. And that brings us to the third cost, the most elusive one, the hardest to name. You begin to lose contact with yourself, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly through years in which every time someone came too close, you took a step back. Every time closeness was within reach, you chose a distance that looked like freedom. And one day you are sitting somewhere, maybe in a car, maybe late at night, and you realize you do not know what you actually want from closeness. Not because you have not thought about it, but because you have kept that question at a distance for so long that you lost your feel for the answer. A wound that has healed over on the outside does not hurt all the time. That is the problem too. It hurts only when someone touches the right place. And between those moments, everything looks fine. Everything works. Life moves on. And that very functionality becomes the most elegant form of avoidance. There is no moment when this ends, no day when you wake up and the wound is closed, no decision that changes everything, no relationship that heals you, no matter how much some part of you may still be waiting for that relationship. That is not pessimism, it is precision. Because while you are waiting for the wound to disappear, you are missing the only thing that is actually available, not healing, but awareness. The ability to recognize the mechanism before it decides for you. That second between stimulus and reaction, that is the only space where anything can change. Rainer Maria Rilke, the Austrian poet many consider one of the greatest lyric poets of the 20th century, wrote letters to a young poet who asked him for advice. In one of those letters, he wrote something that did not sound like advice. It sounded like a diagnosis. He wrote, "Learn to love the questions. Live with them. Do not search for answers yet. You do not have them. And you would not even be able to bear them if you did. That is not poetic comfort. It is a description of the work. Because integrating this pattern does not look like opening up. It does not look like one moment of vulnerability that changes everything. It looks much more boring than that. It looks like you stay. When everything in you is looking for the exit, you stay, not because you feel safe, not because it does not hurt, but because you recognize the mechanism and decided that this time it will not decide for you. It looks like you allow someone to see you, not in some grand dramatic sense, but in a small, almost invisible one. You answer honestly when someone asks how you are. You do not look away when someone holds your gaze too long. You do not step back when it starts to feel too real. Millimeter by millimeter, with no guarantee, with no promise that it will not hurt. There are people who have lived with this natal structure their entire lives and never named it, who functioned, who had relationships, friends, loves, but always with that same distance between themselves and everything that might have become truly close. And there are those who at some point, not dramatic, not special, simply decided that distance costs more than closeness. A wound that has healed over on the outside does not need to be opened again in order to let you live. It needs to be acknowledged. That is all. No more than that, but no less.